Hello everyone. Had quite a few questions on my build. Done some showcase videos. Some people have asked how I farmed up currency on this build and how the build works. So here is a more complete build guide, as well as some showcases. I'm gonna have some gameplay in the background while I drone on and on about the build. Hope you get your questions answered, and if you have any others, feel free to post in the comments below. We'll go ahead and get started here. The main portions of this build, at its core, it's just a charge stacking abuser build. So what you need to get started on this build, before you even start charge stacking, you need a good wand. You can use Toolborn, you can use Tool Fault. I bought mine for 4C on the first day, and it helped me in early maps and later until I could get a Tool Fall. You can also use Void Battery. Void Battery is really good for this build because it gives +1 power charge. Tool Fall is more DPS because of the added flat cold damage. With the Ice Nova of Frostbolts changes, its flat cold damage has been reduced quite a lot, which is fair because it does an insane amount of damage, but getting this added flat cold damage helps a lot, especially as we scale with percent cold damage and power charges later on. You also, as soon as you can, you'll want to throw in a Malachi's Loop Shield. Main problem with the shield is it shocks you when you reach maximum power charges, and you lose all power charges when you reach maximum power charges. So really, before you can use this shield, you'll want to have the Relikesh's and Patience boots. These count you as having the maximum number of charges. So up until you can get these boots, because these boots are pretty expensive this league since they got buffed quite a bit, you can just throw in either another Tool Fall, a +2 wand, another shield, anything really, because you need these boots. Otherwise, your power charges will get taken every time you reach maximum. Until you get these boots, there's also charge stacking built, or ways to stack charges using Ice Bite support, and also power charge on critical support. Along with the Occultist Ascendancy, it has a way that you gain a power charge every time you spend 200 mana on a skill, which is really easy to do with Frostbolts because it's a very expensive skill. And we'll get into that later on, but you'll need to reduce a lot of your mana costs if you want to cast this as fast as you need to. Moving on, so you need a power charge stacking wand, either Void Battery or Tool Fall, Relikesh boots, Malachi's Loop, as well as Badge of the Brotherhood. Badge of the Brotherhood, it makes your maximum frenzy charges equal to your maximum power charges, which means you only need to worry about stacking power charges and you'll get frenzy charges equal to that, which is really good for this build because your DPS comes from a ridiculous number of Novas that you'll be casting very, very fast. On top of that, there are several other items for this build. Pretty much everything else is up to you. You also don't necessarily need to have these. You can go with a Pledge of Hands version of this build. What's good about this one is Socketed Gems are supported by level 30 Greater Spell Echo. And the main reason this build is so good, I'll get into that in a second, but your Frostbolts will echo your spells instead of you. So, pause the gameplay. We'll zoom in here. This Ice Nova Frostbolts, I've got Spell Echo on it right now, so you can see when I run around, if I cast it, I stop for a second to cast it twice because of Spell Echo, which is really annoying when you're trying to map or do anything, and it is twice as bad when you're using this staff because you stay still while you cast it 3 times, and then you'll be casting it even 4 times if you add Spell Echo support in with this staff. But you can see how I'm just moving smoothly here now that I have the Frostbolts out. It's because if you look, I press the button once and it echoes off of the Frostbolts instead of from you. So instead of 4 casts, we're actually getting 8 casts, which is why your mana depletes so very fast with this build. And with this, you're essentially getting 4 casts every cast of Frost Nova. So instead of 4 Frost Novas on 4 Frostbolts, you're getting 16 Frost Novas on 4 Frostbolts, which scales the DPS an incredible amount. So this staff is really good. It's better on Hierophant because of the mana and increased spell damage. You can do mana stacking, power charging Hierophant if you really want to use this staff. You can also use it on Occultist. I was using it for quite a while. It's really good, but it is better on Hierophant. I'm also using the this was new last league, the Atula's Hunger Plate, because this build uses a lot of uniques. You don't really get a whole lot of life. You can get life on a belt, on your rings, your helmet, and gloves. Or you can just get it all on your chest piece. I'm getting plus 975 to life here. Increased stun and block recovery, which is really good for this build. Recovering life, which is also really good. And then it's double corrupted for physical damage reduction while stationary and plus 2 level of socket AoE gems. The physical damage reduction while stationary is really good because with this build you are stationary quite often. So stacking power charges is good because you'll want to be tanky with this build, as well as block chance and spell block chance. Spell suppress you can't really fit in very well, but I also haven't needed it because my version of the build uses petrified blood, which is essentially you reserve half of your life with arrogance on Herald of Ice, and then you throw in petrified blood so that 40% of damage is essentially prevented. It happens when you're below half-life. You're always below half-life, and then you just lose 76% of that 40% of the damage that was prevented over 4 seconds, which stacks really well with Progenesis as well, and it stacks really well with health, which you get from this chestplate. So this chestplate's really good. You can also throw in Skin of the Lords, Skin of the Loyal, pretty much any other chestplate you can think of. I've seen some people do Chevron's Wrapping so that they can reserve pretty much all of their life and just stack Energy Shield. You can also, once you get enough damage, you can swap out Malachi's Loop for an Aegis if you want to be really tanky. There's a lot of different ways to take this build. I like using Surge Binders for the DPS increase that you get, also because it's easy to find a pair that have Curse on hit, which for a cultist is really good with Profane Bloom, because then you get even more explosions. And with the way that you're able to stack AoE on this build, your Herald of Ice and Profane Bloom explosions are both quite ginormous, as well as your Ice Nova. Like this, I'm not even stacking that much AoE. I was stacking way more than this in my Nova. You couldn't even see the edges of it on my screen. I decided that was a bit too ridiculous, and I wanted to be tanky and have more damage, so I cut back a little bit on the AoE so that I could be tankier and do more damage. Later in the game, once you have a lot of currency, you can start stacking more power charges with your helmet. That's the next best thing to get power charges on after you've done wand and shield, and then rings. These are always going to be extremely expensive. I pretty much farmed all weekend league start and dumped everything I made into buying this for 40 divines on the 3rd day of the league start. I even had to take out a small loan to do so. But you only need one of these, and then you can reflect it with the Calandra's Touch Ring. Other important stats to have on the ring are resistances, because you don't get very many because of all the uniques that are in this build, and reduced mana cost, because Frost Nova is a thirsty boy. Inspiration support also helps with mana costs. Once you get a Mage Blood, you can throw in a reduced mana cost flask that'll be up all of the time, and you can swap this out for Empower or something else. I also used a reduced mana cost flask for a long time before I got this ring, just because Ice Nova costs so much mana. Moving on from the items, jump over to the passive tree. I use the Wildwood Ascendancy for charms because recovering life and energy shield and mana on kill is so incredibly good, as is Culling Strike and especially the power charge stacker suffixes here. So increased crit multi, this adds an incredible amount of DPS, and you can stack them. Same with increased AoE, that adds an incredible amount of area of effect, and you can also stack that. You also have the unique jewels from this league, so I have increased AoE on that. Can't take reflected elemental damage, which is huge. Minus 7% extra on exposure. Incredibly strong for this build. The most important things in the passive tree, obviously, are the charges, because we're using Relicash Boots in this build. There's another way to stack charges using Feral's Fur and Aspect of the Cat. I used that last league. It was really good, but Relicash Boots have been buffed, so those are actually better in my opinion. So we also get endurance charges with those. So important things: power charges, and then I've got this anointed on my amulet. After that, if you want to be tanky, you want block chance and spell block chance, which is what I'm using because I stand still so often. If you're using once you can upgrade to the low life version, once you've got enough currency for everything, you'll want recoup. So there's these 2 recoup clusters here. The Blood Notch Jewel is also incredibly helpful because 50% of damage taken from stunning hits also counts as blocked hits, so it stacks really well with glancing blows down here because it doubles your chance to block attack damage and spell damage, which means that you're recouping it makes you take more damage, and then you're recouping an incredible amount of that damage with these 2 clusters here and this jewel. Other important stuff, life nodes, so that you can be tanky since you're reserving half of your life. Instant leech is nice when you're leeching energy shield. This section right here for power charge, or charge stacking in general, is incredibly helpful. And then you'll want a Militant Faith jewel with reduced mana cost per 10 devotion because, again, Ice Nova is a thirsty boy. And it needs to be Dominus on this Militant Faith so that you get the Inner Conviction Keystone, which helps with your charge stacking. Other important things, I discovered this league. The Burden Projection notable. 8% chance to knock back enemies on hit with spell damage. If you have been watching the gameplay footage, you'll see me throwing enemies all over the place, and they can't get to me, which is a great defensive layer. Other important ones, like Hinder on hit, that helps a lot with some of your defenses. Spell block. Just a good cluster in general. I'm using a 12 passive eye level 84 that I dropped from Simulacrum. I just crafted it. I would not pay 10 divines for one of these since they're so easy to craft. Just buy a base, alt spam it until you get 35% increased effect, and another good modifier on it, and then just exalt it until you hit it. Doesn't take that long. It took me like 10 minutes to craft this. Cost me almost nothing. And then I'm also using Storm Shroud. So this, you'll remember, Malachi's Loop shocks you when you reach maximum power charges. So you'll want shock immunity on something. You can use Tempest Shield. You can use Purity of Elements. You can use Abyss Jewels that give 50% chance to avoid being shocked. I'm using 2 of those and a Storm Shroud, so I'm completely immune to elemental ailments now. There's a lot of ways to go about it. Budget version, definitely Tempest Shield. Other important ones, because I'm using block, this Immutable Force Jewel, and we're self-cast, so Immutable Force is huge quality of life improvement, because before you get this, you were stuck constantly. Like, you flame dash into a group of enemies, you're just standing around, there's a tanky elite that is crit resistant and spell resistant, probably also cold, chill, and freeze resistant, and you do 0 damage to it, and he just walks up to you, hits you, stuns you constantly, and then you die. This you can keep casting because you have so much stun and block recovery. Also stacks incredibly well with Blood Notch. I do believe that is it. For the Ascendancy, fairly simple. This just boosts your damage a lot. I recommend taking these 2 first, this one third, and then Profane Bloom or Unholy Authority as your 4th one. Unholy Authority is really good when you are low budget and you need to get through your Atlas, you need to kill bosses. Unholy Authority you can slap on Arcanus Brand with 2 curses and Frost Bomb. Slap that on a boss and you will do incredible damage to those bosses and also elites. I like Profane Bloom later on since I only need 1 curse really, and I'm cursing on hit with Surge Binders, so everything around me is just exploding even more than it already does. We will jump into Path of Building now. Just go over the configuration real quick. So you remember I talked about how it echoes off of your Frostbolts. So Ice Nova, to correctly determine your DPS in here, you'll want to have a count of 8, because your initial cast you'll have 4, so you'll have the 4 Frostbolts and you'll have 4 Ice Novas from those Frostbolts, and then it echoes and you're casting again, so then you'll have 8. If you are using Pledge of Hands, this will actually be 16, because you'll be casting You'll have the initial 4, it'll echo, you'll cast again, you'll have 8, it'll echo, you'll cast again, you'll have 12, and it'll echo for the 4th time, and you'll cast again up to 16. It takes a bit longer to ramp up to 16, so the damage isn't quite the same as this because it takes more time to ramp, but it also lets you hit in a much bigger radius because it's echoing so much more, which I'll show you here. So I throw the Frostbolts out, I cast on it, it echoes, so it's actually hitting pretty far off screen, and you can cast it while those Frostbolts are over there, so it's hitting completely off screen. With Pledge of Hands, it echoes twice as many times, and so it's echoing all the way up there, and you're killing so many things off the screen. So it's really good for mapping. Back to Path of Building here. Power Charge on critical, huge DPS boost. Spell Echo, obviously huge DPS boost because you're doubling your Frost Novas. Ice Bite, also a huge DPS boost because of the added cold damage, because Ice Nova does not have a whole lot of flat cold damage anymore when you're casting on Frostbolt. Inspiration for reduced mana costs, and then crit damage. You can swap this out for a lot of things. Awakened Spell Echo is also better than Spell Echo, I just haven't bought it yet. It's not that much more important than Spell Echo, and it's really expensive, so I just haven't been able to justify the cost. I like critical damage. If you don't have enough crit chance, then you can swap this for critical strikes. That's what I did early on until I had enough power charges to really get my crit chance high. Onto the configuration here. So this doesn't really matter, since if you have your PoB set up right, it'll show you reserving your life. I like to use Soul of Tukohama because we spend so much time stationary. It's just free physical damage reduction, which we need help with since we don't actually have that much armor. I'm using a flask. Eventually, I might throw in Determination. But our physical damage it needs help. The endurance charges help with that a lot as well. I am also using Bottled Faith, so Consecrated Ground, you also get that from Zealotry. Cast a spell recently, that just helps with my spell block chance. Enemy, I have a 30% chill effect on enemies all of the time. Yours might not be quite that high depending on what your damage is. They're also usually frozen, and they're usually dead before they're frozen. I am technically shocking for 9%. I don't have that in here because I don't know how consistent that is, and I don't see it very often because everything is dead all of the time so fast. This is where I'm getting a lot of damage because I've been farming Simulacrum. I threw in a Bottled Faith with 66% increased effect. Just for when I'm fighting Kosis on wave 30, he is incredibly tanky, and I need to kill him before he kills me. So that's where a big part of my DPS is coming in. You don't need Bottled Faith. 69 million DPS, which is a nice number, is more than enough. Again, a lot of my EHP comes from them being outside Frost Shield. They're not usually outside, so you'll want to check this box. My Frost Shield also, if I'm not using it at all, my EHP drops quite a bit. And honestly, this is enough for most things. I only use Frost Shield, again, when I'm face-taking Kosis or Omniphobia or other scary things in Delirium maps, which you can see in the gameplay video when I cast it. I'll be right next to an Abyss or something, and Assassin will pop up, and extra tankiness helps. And then skill links. So these are my 4 ores that I'm using currently. I don't really have room for any more in this build. I threw in Arctic Armor on my shield for a little bit, but it wasn't really worth needing to get all of the mana reservation efficiency. So instead I'm using Frost Shield. If you're not ailment immune or shock immune, you can swap this out for Tempest Shield. Arcane Surge is nice for the cast speed and mana regen. Flame Dash. You can also use the new Frost Blink, which I think is incredibly good, but it casts pretty slow, and I like the instant cast of Flame Dash. I'm also using Immortal Call, cast from damage taken. That helps my tankiness quite a bit, as you can see. It gives me an incredibly large max hit for physical damage. Really helpful for initial hits. You'll probably see me die once in the gameplay video when my Immortal Call expires and I'm surrounded by enemies and I'm foolishly not freezing them. Herald of Ice for the explosions and again, more flat cold damage Frostbolt, I really like having faster casting on here. I see a lot of people throwing slower projectiles, which is really helpful for shotgunning bosses if your DPS is low. Mine is not low, so I like faster casting so I can get the Frostbolts out faster. One of the main drawbacks of this build is that you have to throw out your Frostbolts first and then start casting, so it's a little bit of setup time, especially since you also have to ramp while it gets the first echo out. So it just helps you get that little bit faster, which is really important if you die in the middle of a boss fight and they aren't phased, and so they're going to attack you as soon as you come in and you need to get set up, but you don't have time because you're usually dead right after you cast Frostbolt. And then returning projectiles is huge, and greater multiple projectiles. You can also swap this out for greater volley. I use volley early on when I need to shotgun better and my AoE isn't very big, and then I swap to GMP. Frostbomb, I used to have this on Arcanus brand along with Assassin's Mark, and then I got rid of my extra curse because I didn't need it. Elemental weakness is good enough. And then Bone Chill, especially if you were doing Delirium maps, is incredibly powerful. So if we swap this to standard boss, 100% Delirious, you can see my DPS drops an incredible amount. And if I am not using Bone Chill, it drops even more. So Bone Chill on Frostbomb is huge free DPS, especially on tanky things. So I've got it on my right click. I only drop it if I see something that's incredibly tanky or freeze or chill resistant. Bone Chill helps so much with that. And that is about it for this build. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I will close this out with a showcase on me doing Wave 30 Simulacrum. And hope to see you next time.